This is Note Taker 17 on classification. Before we ever started classifying in science, people were using classification or making observations that would allow them to survive, and oftentimes that meant finding something and grouping it with another thing that you already knew existed, and then you would judge whether or not that was safe or not. But then we did start to actually technically classify things. Another name for classification is taxonomy. You do need to know both of these terms for the quiz. But classification is actually the grouping of things, because it doesn't always have to be living, they can be non-living things, and we group them according to similar characteristics that they may have. So we've been using classification not just in science, but we use it in all our subjects. In civics, you group the branches of the government. We classify into the groups of the branches of the government. In math, you group by numbers. You have positive numbers, negative numbers, rationals. You have all these groups that you can classify numbers into. In English, we classify types of speech. We have verbs, we have nouns. Well, in science, we classify more to learn about life and some of the non-living things that are actually on Earth. And we also use it to show special relationships that exist. Our first classification system was developed in the 4th century BC by a Greek philosopher named Aristotle. And back then, you have to realize that there was no technology, so we didn't know things like bacteria or protists, things that are too small to be seen. We didn't know that they even existed back then. So what he did was he formed a classification system in which everything that he saw that was living, which was basically plants and animals, he grouped them into either plants or animals. And then he further divided those groups into smaller categories. For example, animals, he broke into 3 groups. Animals that could fly, animals that walked, animals that swam. Now, the problem with this is that he had animals grouped together that didn't belong together. For example, the bat and the bird. Because they could both fly, they fell into the fly category, but bats and birds are not related. Bats are mammals and are more related to us as humans than they are to birds. The other problem with his system was that when you grouped something, it could only be what you saw it doing in that moment of time when you were watching it. So you get something like a penguin that could walk on land and could swim. Well, the penguin would fall into the swim or the walk category. However, it's a bird, and all the other birds that could fly were in a totally different category. So his system had a lot of issues to it. However, his system was accepted and used for about 2,000 years. And then in the 18th century, there was a Swedish scientist named Carolus Linnaeus. And he used all the work from scientists before him, and he came up with a classification system that we still use today. Now, we've had to make some little changes to it, but it is still the same system we use. Because at the time he came up with this, we were just starting the invention of the microscope, so they weren't as prevalent during this time. So he still grouped things into either plant or animal category, but instead of categorizing them further by how they moved, he used similarities in their body forms. This was much more correct. In addition to coming up with the classification system, he also developed a way to name organisms. Now, the current way, or the way that was being used at the time, was everything had a common name. So if they saw a dog run in front of them, it was a dog. If they saw a skunk walk through the yard, it was a skunk. The problem with common names for naming things is that depending on where you are on Earth, what language they speak, the names are going to be different. So what I call a dog, people who speak French are going to have a different word for it. So common names aren't that great of a way to name things or when you're talking about them in a scientific circle. So Linnaeus came up with a way called binomial nomenclature. And if you reference the word wall in the room, you'll notice that the prefix bi means two. So it's to name, and then nomenclature means naming system. The two names that every living thing gets are going to be its genus name and its species name, in that order. You do have to know that for the quiz. Those two names in that order. And the names are usually made from either a Latin or Greek derivative. And these two names are going to make up the scientific name of the organism. So all humans, their scientific name is Homo sapiens. Homo is the genus, sapiens is our species name. And every human has that same scientific name. Now, if we're talking about things in the wild, and I'm talking about a maple tree, I have to be specific what type of maple I'm talking about. So if I'm talking about a red maple, I'm going to have a certain scientific name. But if I talk about a different type of maple tree, it will have its own specific scientific name. So our genus and species names are very specific to the species, and a species is a group of animals, or I should say a group of living things that can mate successfully with each other. Successful mating means that they can have babies that can someday have babies. So you will have the same scientific name as other members of your same species. Now, with that scientific name, the genus name, which is the first word, should start with a capital letter. The species name is going to start with a lowercase letter. And a lot of times, as you see in the sentence, the scientific name for the wolf is Canis lupus. A lot of times when you see it in print like this, it'll either be in italics or occasionally you'll see it underlined. Now, no two organisms have the same scientific name if they're different species. So, there's a cat that lives in the mountain, and we usually call it a mountain lion. But if you go other places in the United States, it may be called a puma or it may be called a cougar. These are the common names. No matter where you live, and no matter what common name you use, the scientific name for that animal is Felis concolor. So no matter what language you speak, no matter where you are in the world, that is its scientific name. So now we can have scientists get together and be able to talk about things and be able to use that same language when referring to living things. Now, classification today, it's been over 200 years since Linnaeus created his classification system, and we still do use it today. We've had to make some minor adjustments to it because eventually we realized mushrooms weren't plants, so they needed their own group, fungus. And then eventually when bacteria and protists were discovered, we needed to make those groups also. So we've had to make minor changes, but the overall way we classify is still the way Linnaeus created so long ago. Now, the modern classification system, it may seem kind of complicated to you with these weird names, but it's going to serve two important functions in science. First, it gives each species of organism a unique name, that no matter where you are in the world, that name is the same. And it groups organisms, more importantly, according to their characteristics, and it shows how they're related on the evolutionary tree. So when we talk about living things, all living things, whether it's a bacteria, the tiniest bacteria, all the way to the largest blue whale, all living things are going to be classified into 8 major groups. And these groups are from the largest, with the most number of members, all the way down to the smallest grouping, which is going to be the most specific in one type of living thing. These groups are the domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. On the next slide, I will show you a breakdown for an owl. The classification for the great horned owl is as follows. Now you'll notice the top of the picture there, which is domain Eukarya. And you'll notice that in that picture there are lots of different types of living things. We have some animals there, we actually have a plant there, we have fungus, and we even have a little protus, which is the thing above the mushroom that almost looks like a jelly bean shape. But you can see that there are lots of different living things fitting in that domain. Domain Eukarya, a eukaryote is anything that has a true nucleus inside of its cells. Now if we drop down one to Kingdom Animalia, you'll notice that we had to knock out a few of the pictures, because when we go to Kingdom Animalia, we're talking about just the animals. So we had to take out the protist, we had to take out the mushroom, and we had to take out the tree. We drop down another one to phylum, we're talking about phylum Chordata. Chordates are any animal that has a backbone. So when we look at the pictures there, all of the animals in that picture, or that are left in that teal colored block, are going to be animals that do have a backbone. If we drop down to class, it's class Aves. Aves is a word that means bird, so now we have just the birds. If we drop down one more, we get order Strigiformes. These are birds of prey that include our owls. Drop down one more to family, and we got Strigidae. These are going to be nocturnal owls in the class Strigiformes. Then we drop down to Bubo, which is genus Bubo. These are going to be our horned owls that have the furry tufts up by their ears. And then we reach the species, and you'll notice we're left with just one type of bird there. And the species here is Virginianus. So if we follow it down, its scientific name is Bubo virginianus. And this species means that actually it was named after Virginia, because Virginia was the first place that a specimen of this owl was collected. So its scientific name, its genus and species, is Bubo virginianus. Now if we were to follow this down, once you get down to the genus and species, if we had a different animal like the wolf, you'd see genus Canis, species Lupus. Or a dog, a regular house dog, you would have genus Canis, and then under the species you would see Familiaris. So each type of living thing is going to have its own scientific name, and we'll have this entire 8-level breakdown. So the domain is going to be your largest and most general. You're going to have lots of different types of living thing in that group. Your species is going to be the smallest and most specific. So once you reach the species, again, we're talking about just one type of living thing in that group. Now for the quiz, you do need to know all 8 of these in order from largest to smallest. So I've included a sentence here. It's called a mnemonic device, and that's a sentence where the first letter of each word represents the words you have to memorize in order from largest to smallest. So the one that I learned when I was your age was Daring King Philip came over from Granada, Spain. Another one that I've learned since then as I've been teaching, you can also use dumb kids pick candy over fancy green salads. And each of those sentences, the first letter of each word represents a level of the classification system. So D represents domain, K kingdom, P phylum, C class, O order, F family, G genus, S species. So if you can remember the sentence, it will help you at least get the first letter in order so that you can fill in the rest of the classification level. The last thing we're going to talk about on this note taker are dichotomous keys. Dika comes from Greek and it means to, and Tiemann means to cut. So with a dichotomous key, it's something we use as a scientist to help us identify things that we're not sure what it is. And we're going to be using quite a few of these in class so that you get the hang of understanding how to use them. Now with a dichotomous key, each step is going to give you two choices. It's almost like a choose your own adventure book where you always start at step 1 and it's going to give you an A choice and a B choice. If it's A, it'll tell you what number step to go to next. If it's B, it'll tell you where to go next. So what I've done is on the next slide, I have put an example of a dichotomous key. Now, most of you, when you click over or see this picture, you're going to know what the creature is at the bottom, but for a second, pretend you don't. And then follow the key, start at number 1, and follow it down, and you will finally reach what it is. All right, so at the bottom of this slide, we have a picture. Little black and brown thing. We have to pretend we don't know what it is. So we're going to start at step 1 at the top. Does the animal have a backbone? Does the animal not have a backbone? So the animal in question, that's in the picture, does not have a backbone. So we're going to go directly to step number 5. We don't need to stop at 2. You don't need to stop at 3. You don't need to stop at 4. It tells you to go to 5, so you need to go directly there. For number 5, it says organism has antennae, or B, organism does not have antennae. So since the picture, the animal does not have any antennae, this animal, if you follow over, this would be a spider. I know, big surprise, but this is how you use a dichotomous key. Each time you start with a new item or a new living thing, you go to step number 1 and you start all over again. So we're going to be practicing using these in class. So don't worry, you're going to get plenty of practice. Before you put your notes away, please don't forget to answer the 3-question assessment that follows.